is email? What does it mean?
Communication is the imparting or exchanging of information or news.
The single biggest problem in communication is the illusion that it has taken place.
Conversation is the oral exchange of sentiments, observations, opinions, or ideas.
Forbes Books Radio presents The Conversation with Clinton M. Padgett.
Welcome to the first episode of my podcast on Forbes Books Radio, where we'll use conversations to bring clarity to complex issues. We'll accomplish that by delving into the research being done on conversation and communication, as well as team dynamics. We'll meet some fascinating authors and business leaders to get their take on the importance of having a clear vision to guide their teams, businesses, and employees. Along the way, we'll validate my premise that actual conversations are far superior to one-way communications like email or text, when miscommunication or confusion spells doom for your mission. My guest today is Keith Ferrazzi, the founder and CEO of Ferrazzi Greenlight. He has spent over 30 years coaching executive teams and is the author of the #1 bestsellers, Never Eat Alone and Who's Got Your Back. His latest book, Leading Without Authority, How the New Power of Co-Elevation Can Break Down Silos, Transform Teams, and Reinvent Collaboration, is out on May 26th. Keith, thanks for joining me today.
Clint, I'm excited about the conversation.
In your new book, I've read the co-elevation continuum. It kind of goes from resentment to co-elevation. Can you kind of give me a high-level view of what that is?
For a profession, I coach executive teams of large corporations to become transformational and to become radically adaptable. And what I noticed was that the executives on the teams that I coach, their stasis position, the position in which they live and breathe on a normal basis, is what I call coexistence. They're earnestly doing their great job. And when they can't get their job done with the resources they have, they slip into collaboration. That's a fallback to let's live in coexistence. And by the way, there's nothing wrong with this. This isn't a nefarious situation. It's just everybody thinks they're busy enough. Everybody thinks everybody's busy. We all have a job to do. What they're missing is the reality that collaboration in the world of the pressures we're living in today needs to be a constant state. Living in a state of collaboration needs to be a state in which we are getting more inclusive, more innovative, more breakthrough answers than we ever have before. And that will not happen if we live predominantly in coexistence. The idea of it going into collaboration, and then what happens when you get into collaboration, if you're not getting your way, you can get into resistance. And then you get a little bit of grist to relationship there. And I see this happen all the time. I'm sure you do in your work. And what often happens is if there's a bad personal relationship among that executive team, it is very quick where the individuals can slip into resentment. And I have seen value to customers and shareholders eroded over years because of the puerile, infantile behavior of executives who don't like each other. To me, it's inexcusable. It is like stealing from shareholders. There's an entire chapter in my book where I go through and I beat folks up because of the excuses we use not to collaborate. I take it one step further. I say, listen, collaboration needs to be the basis, but let's really go to another level. And I invented a word because the coaching that I do of teams, particularly executive teams of large companies, the coaching that I do is helping a company like Delta Airlines reinvent the travel industry. And now, how do you have a company like Delta Airlines? How do you help Delta through a crisis like this where they've been hit as hard as they've been hit? This is an extraordinary group of individuals, by the way. And you cannot exist through transformation without not only a commitment, a shared, aligned commitment to a North Star mission, but a commitment to each other. And the whole point of high-performing, maximizing teams is that they are co-elevating. They're going higher together. They're lifting each other up. They're challenging each other. They're giving each other feedback. They're co-creating solutions, not individuals in the silos figuring stuff out. They are working through it together to break through. They're bringing diversity and inclusion to the table in ways they've never done before. And that is co-elevation. And I have created this book as a model for what we believe the operating system of the future is. And it's not the future, it's the operating system of today.
That's great. So with co-elevation being the highest stake, can you give me an example of maybe a company that's done that really, really well?
Oh, absolutely. Well, I'll give you one that I'm just working with literally this morning. So I'm working with a large insurance company. And this is a company that's fairly backwater in its traditional ways of working, and it doesn't change very easily. And it knows it. It knows it. That's why we were brought in to be of service to help them be more transformational. But in 1 month, in literally less than a week, they had to move from call centers being the predominant way they worked to everybody working out of their homes. And they did it, damn it. They did it. So that kind of pressure for transformational performance needs to be a go forward pressure for transformational performance. So if they've done it once, they can do it again. So in one of the chapters of the book, it's around co-creation. I challenged them and I said, listen, let's identify in the next 30 to 60 days, what radical transformation, similar to the one that we just went through, equally as transformational, could we commit to for the future that could reinvent our business? And they did. They committed to 2 things that just blew me away. And they did it. And there's no one of them on that executive team that could have pulled that off. No one of them could have done it. They committed as a team. The ideations were back and forth. They fed on each other. And they ended up creating basically a fully digital house. This is an organization that has used fax machines, literally fax machines. I'm not joking. And they have committed to go fully digital, which is a full transformation of their distribution channel. And that's going to happen in 30 to 90 days. They have been talking about minor movements in that direction for 5 years. 30 to 60, 90 days, they're going to do it.
That's amazing. And so it's one of those things where the whole is better than the sum of its individual parts then.
Yeah. I was talking to Unilever this morning, interviewing them for a piece that I'm writing about the adoption of agile principles in our executive suite, which this book is a big proponent of, which is we working on collaborative sprints to work, not just one big project. Anyway, they didn't have hand sanitizer in the United States, and would have normally taken 6 months for them to incubate, design, and ship a new product. I think it was 20 days. They had hand sanitizer on the shelves in the United States as a result of this crisis. So product design, product sourcing, all of that, 20 days versus 6 months. Co-elevation.
Amazing. So I know one of the other things I've read or seen, there's another company that maybe didn't do this very well, and that was WeWork. What do you think went wrong there?
One of the observations that I have made about WeWork is that they have a set of customers that show up and rent space for them, right? But what I have felt was missing from WeWork was, aside from cool snacks and cool space, which I guess in Kansas is a differentiator, or certain cities is a differentiator. What if they actually helped the entrepreneurs who were sitting in those spaces find ways to tap into each other? I mean, I understand if you create a reasonable environment and throw beer pong receptions, that people will get to know each other socially. But what if they went intentional? What if they helped the customers, their clients, their tenants, become co-elevators of each other? What if they created peer-to-peer support groups inside of their facilities? I feel like if that were to have occurred, the loyalty of those individuals, you wouldn't leave your space because you'd be leaving your network. And I don't feel that they doubled down sufficiently on that. Now, you want to ask the question, from what I can tell, a big problem with WeWork was that some critical constituencies, like their bankers, weren't aligned with the executive team as much. It seemed like they were going in different directions, and that's because the executive team never considered their bankers a part of their team. I mean, look, we need to co-create. I'm constantly coaching CEOs of publicly traded companies how to enlist their board appropriately. I'm writing a piece right now on how board meetings are being reinvented for co-elevation and in a remote world, because the board itself needs to ask itself, what is its role around governance, fiduciary responsibility, et cetera. And I think co-elevation is a model for how a board should be functioning together, right? But then you put those two together, the executive team and the board co-creating value for the organization and monitoring governance. The first chapter in Leading Without Authority teaches you to rethink your definition of team. The chapter is called Who's Your Team? Too many people think of team as, particularly leaders, as the people that they control. It's not the people you control. It's the people that you need to get your job done. That is a massive, in a world where I think the future of organization design, the future of getting stuff done, is a vision aligned to a network. Meaning, I got a vision. I know what I want to do. And who is the network of people that will get me there? That to me is your team. And I don't give a damn if they work for you. I don't give a damn if they work in the same company as you. They are the people that you need to achieve what you need to achieve. And they could involve your customers directly. So anyway, I put all of that out on the table. I think the principle of co-elevation is at the core of all groups trying to work together and trying to create value together. And I just wanted to create a more clear methodology on how you do that when you don't have managerial positional authority to point the finger at people and say, do this. How many of us have enough resources and people that you could point the finger at and say, do this? And by the way, in this day and age with millennials, if you pointed the finger at them and said, do this, that doesn't necessarily mean they would. And would.
No, exactly. Well, in order to really embrace this co-elevation concept, does one need to remove pre-existing thoughts in your head? I remember in one of your earlier books, there was an early conversation. You were trying to get an introduction into somebody in Hollywood, and you had lunch with or coffee with a guy who basically said, I'm not going to introduce you because that's a relationship that I have, and I might ask a favor one day. So that clearly doesn't go with co-elevation. That's all about me, not about us getting something better than we would individually.
Yeah. Clint, you're good. You pull up an archaic book with a archaic reference. Good for you.
A very good book.
Thank you. Look, there's a better chapter in this new book. It's not about how do you co-elevate. It's how do you get other people to co-elevate with you. And the chapter is my favorite chapter, and it's called "It's All on You." There are people in the world who don't think in this mindset. Most people don't think in this mindset. Most people are worried about themselves right now, particularly now when there's such scarcity and crisis and fear going on. The way you get other people enlisted on your team, I call it serve, share, and care. Serve, share, and care. What I have seen is when an executive is frustrated with another executive because they won't play ball the way you want them to play ball, you can't just cross your arms and say, well, when you start behaving the way I want you to behave, I'll behave the way I want to behave. It's going to leave you in a failure situation, or worse, mediocre. What I'm trying to get people to realize is that they need to own the relationships that are required to achieve great things. And so in that situation, had I been writing this book then, or if I had known what I know now when I was writing that book, I would have found a way for that gentleman to support me by first leading with generosity and finding a way to support him. Second, opening myself up authentically and finding a way to connect with him, and making sure that that person knows that I am on their team. So I often say that when you're inviting somebody onto your team, you're inviting yourself into their team. That's how someone pays attention to you. So you got to have to spend a little bit more time up front to figure out how to be on their team in a way that advantages them. And it's not just direct reciprocity. It's in order for them to open up the space for you to have the permission to convince them of your mission, of your vision, and it's not selling it to them because, and that's why I hate the word buy-in. If you talk about selling an idea to somebody or buying in, it's you pitching your idea. The real answer to breakthrough extraordinary solutions is co-creation, getting bigger solutions together than you would have had as independent.
I think one of the big takeaways I took away from your first book, actually, that I've used for over a decade now, is the idea that you want to connect people, even though there's no benefit to you, if it makes them both stronger and better. And so I've tried to do that throughout my career. And I think that's kind of the same thing you were saying here. It's really about serve. How can I serve?
In my first book, Never Eat Alone, I was writing a book for how you could open doors of opportunity for yourself. Some people call that networking. And you're basically enlisting people in your network to open doors for yourself. But you do that by helping others, right? And so that you lead with generosity in that way as well. But in this case, I've taken the same principles of Never Eat Alone, but applied it to leadership. So if you've been a fan of Never Eat Alone, Leading Without Authority helps you understand how do you apply the same principles of managing your network as you do as a leader, now managing a network of people that need to create whatever it is you're trying to create. And whether they report to you or they don't report to you is irrelevant.
So the next question I have is kind of tied into what you were just saying. how do you lead without authority if you can't, like I said, you can't make them do it. You can't say, go do this. So what are some things that you do to take that relationship that maybe is at the lower end of the scale, maybe they're in resist state, and move them more up to the co-elevation state? What are some tips and tricks that we can do to really engage that person who is not where we'd like them to be?
Well, like I said, the chapter in the book that starts it is, it's a word that I created, and it's called opening porosity. Serve, share, and care. How do you open ears and the hearts and the minds of people to collaborating with you? It's an art form, but I really go into detail in the book about how do you approach somebody. There's a great example, I think in chapter 1, a woman named Sandy who is a banker. She's in HR. She's trying to reinvent the commission structure and the compensation system for the company. But the sales folks don't want to have anything to do with her because they want to just do it on their own. And how does she penetrate that group that has actually not positional authority, because she's the head of HR, but they have tacit authority to do whatever the hell they want, because that's what a lot of salespeople have. If you're making the money, you get a lot of permission. So she had to earn her way, and the person was a woman named Jane, who she thought as a disruptor in a bad way, meaning this was the person holding back her potential success. And so Jane became the person that she had to focus on earning the right to co-create with. And what was very interesting about it was she had to start with humility. There was enough of a damaged relationship there that she had to say to her, I apologize. There's a one thing that I try to get people to do is always own your own part. If you have a strained relationship with somebody you've got to collaborate with, you don't have to point out that they're at fault. That's not going to help advance you through the agenda. You have to start with acknowledging that you have created a situation with them that's difficult right now. So I had Sandy go to Jane and apologize for not being a good partner. Now, Sandy's perspective was, are you kidding me? I mean, Jane's stopping me from getting my damn job done, right? But I had to get her to go with humility and open up the conversation. And it did. And what we found very quickly was that Jane was scared to invite Sandy in because Jane's boss and the whole peer group that was in the sales organization wasn't showing up, wasn't helping Jane. They gave her a project and Jane was drowning. And exactly when she needed Sandy, she was afraid to invite Sandy in because she was afraid she'd look bad. And so it was the humility of Sandy opening up that conversation that went vulnerable first. So sharing and caring become the permission to get truth on the table. And people, listen, nobody wants to be struggling with their peers. People who act like assholes in the workplace, it's a very old ritualistic habit of theirs that has created strife for them for years. You can help them get through this. You can help them. I've had plenty of relationships using this philosophy that I turned around and helped partner with me when in reality they were being jackasses to everybody in the company, including me previously. But using this philosophy, I was able to get them to co-create with me. The promise in some instances that other people have to take the credit. Who gives a damn? What you want and what you need to earn is the shareholder value increase. Your job is to make the company better. At the end of the day, I've always seen the person who's the real leader will shine in this situation, not the person who's the credit taker.
I remember I'm a former Coca-Cola employee, and we have it on our wall as soon as you come into the CRB building. The saying, I'll get the quote wrong, but it's basically there's no limit to how high you can go as long as you don't care who gets the credit.
Yeah. And that means you really do have to have a shared commitment to the mission, not just to yourselves personally. And there are people who have very focused commitment to themselves personally, and that's your job as a leader to find appropriate ways to work with them.
Now, I don't know the people that you were just discussing, but I suspect that as a human being, there's an element of fear that says I'm afraid to go in and be humble and say it's my mistake, as a fear of being attacked or being eviscerated. How do you overcome that?
I have 2 children. The youngest one is African American and Hispanic mixed. He considers himself self-identified as African American. I will often talk to him about his perception and the perception of prejudice in this world. Now, I got to be careful as an old white guy having this dialogue to a young inner city kid. He came into our house at 12. He's now 21. But, I say I have to be careful, not because of my intention or my heart. I have to be careful because he doesn't want to listen to me. But I talk about how the greatest prejudice we could all suffer is the prejudgment that people won't accept us. Because in reality, there are a small number of people that won't accept us. There's a lot larger number that will. But if we guard ourselves too securely, we are opting out of the most important relationships that could drive us forward. So, the world says there's about 5% of the active population that are these people we have to guard ourselves against. And maybe it looks like there's 60, but there's 5. And maybe there's 10 in your neighborhood. Maybe there's 20. But don't forget, there's 80% ready to co-create with you. And if you shut down the 80 for fear of the 20, then you're missing out on life. And so, my whole point to people is don't shut down for what you hypothesize your ability is to partner with somebody. You need to go through the work. Do the hard work yourself. It's all on you. That's chapter 2. It's all on you. Do the hard work yourself. And then, sure, you can walk away from a relationship if it doesn't serve you, if it feels inappropriate to you, 100%. But don't walk away from something if you haven't done the hard work.
I saw an interview you did a few years ago, and you were talking about your son and how when you brought him into your life, you went out and found mentors or relationships you could talk to about, I guess having an African-American son in, as you said, a white household. How does that really work? And so I was fascinated by what you did there. That was really interesting, I thought.
Yeah, I mean, by the way, it was a white and Asian household. I'm the only white guy in the house, but and now I'm single, but we're beautifully co-parenting our boys as best we can. They're tough kids. What I did there was very much apply co-elevation in my personal life. What I did there was say, okay, I got this kid and boy, this is tough. Angry, 12-year-old, obstinate, very much like me. I think that's why I was so bonded to him at a young age. He's a real tough cookie. I needed to create a tribe. It takes a village, right? I needed to create a tribe around this boy. And that included other foster kids that are his friends. That included social workers that he has had in his life all his life. That included people that I could bring to the table. He wanted to be a rapper. And I found a unemployed 20-some-year-old dreadlocked cool rapper. And I told my son that this is your rap coach. But what I really needed was a nanny and a translator because he wasn't listening to me. And I needed somebody he would listen to and admire and look up to who could work with me and be that translator, buffer, and caregiver when I didn't have permission. And I got him relationships with people like Quincy Jones. I needed a real ecosystem. And that's my team. That was my team. My team was not just my fiance and I at the time. The team, this network of people roughly committed to this boy, right? But also in the same time committed to each other. So that young, dreadlocked, unemployed rapper, that boy who's just an extraordinary young man, I opened the world to him, relationships, travel, etc. I needed to lead with serve, share, and care for him to do that extra effort to be that liaison for my boy. That's an example of co-elevation in action in that regard. And look, I mentioned I was single. My last relationship, which is yet to be found, my next and last relationship will be a co-elevating relationship. I have a standard now using this book and using my mindset of what relationships need to be. And I know so many powerful, well-respected leaders in the world who are not in marriages that are co-elevating. I'm not going to compromise, which is why it's been 5 years since I've been single. But I'm very excited about that next path. But you start to set a standard for yourself in all the relationships you have.
So is there an example of, and maybe it's the one you just mentioned from the book, is there an example of where you took great pride in someone who really transformed themselves from being that person that was very guarded and yet they saw the benefit of really co-elevating? And is there somebody or you have to give names, but somebody that really is kind of your standard of that's an example of what anybody can do?
The chief operating officer, one of the companies that I worked with and then became the head of sales, his name is Josh. He really awakened in himself personally and professionally to co-elevation. I see it all the time. In another company, and I'll come back to that story, but in another company, a CFO who was about as grizzled as you could come, didn't really respect this team coaching methodology we were bringing to the table around co-elevation for his team. By the end of it, had seen the outcomes. Look, CFOs just want to know if you put the dollar on the bottom line. And this did. We were able to add 20 percentage points of growth. So a 20% increase in their stock price. And he came back to me and he said, you know what's most important about this was I went home and I started using these conversational tools, this way of interacting with each other with my wife. And what I found out was our marriage was on the rocks. I didn't even know it. I identified through this kind of open communication and asking the question of where do we want to be in the future? Her thought was divorced. So that's where they were working from. But he hadn't asked the question. He hadn't had, and a big theme of everything I talk about, as you know, is candor and transparency, bringing more candor and transparency into all of our relationships. And he had the courage to go ask the real questions, and he got the real answers. Great. Now you can co-create a different future.
And I think it's okay if you don't get the answers you hope to get, right? As long as you get the truthful answers.
Yeah.
That was an awesome story, Keith. We're going to stop right there as we wrap up part 1 of my conversation with Keith Ferrazzi. Coming up in part 2, we'll talk about the importance of mutual accountability.
That's a big opportunity, which is, I believe accountability needs to shift from accountability to you as a leader into you facilitating accountability that's peer-to-peer among your team. That's a huge burden shift.
Thanks for listening to The Conversation with Clinton M. Padgett. To find out more about Clint, go to projectsuccess.com or pick up Clint's book, The Project Success Method, at amazon.com. This has been a production of Forbes Books Radio.